Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 4 of our excursion into Asian horror films from the year 2005. While the very best films from this particular year will be covered in part 5, and yes, we will need 5 parts to cover this particular year, there are some fine movies we are going to discuss tonight, and we have an absolutely fantastic selection of films to check out. But we have a lot to get through, so let's get started here. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. And we begin with not 1, not 2, but 3 very interesting and unconventional movies. And the first of which is called Rampo Noir, a Japanese horror anthology. This is an anthology of 4 short films, and they all have one thing in common: exceptional visuals, set designs, and camera work. These movies look awesome and provide a lot of unique visual splendor that contributes visuals that you're not going to see in many films, horror or otherwise. They're practically worth watching for that alone. Another similarity between these films is that Tadanobu Asano appears in all of them. I've mentioned Asano a handful of times in my previous videos, and you will likely be most familiar with his performance in Ichi the Killer, the Takashi Miike film. So if you like him, that's just another reason to check this anthology out. So let's cover some of these films in a little bit more detail, shall we? Now the first story is called Mars Canal, which is an odd title, and it's certainly an odd little film. Within absolute silence, a naked man wanders through a dark and depressing landscape, recalling the excruciating details of his last encounter with his former lover. This one is only 6 minutes long, which is very short, but it is nicely disturbing, actually. It's artificially devoid of sound, so there's no noise at all, not even music for the most part. I think I might remember there's like an ambient noise that comes in from now and again. I might be wrong on that, but very little sound here, which is very disorienting. This actually supplements the very eerie images that are presented. It almost feels like a dark fantasy horror film at times, which is quite interesting. Does it make total sense? Maybe, maybe not. But it's interesting to watch regardless because it's very experimental and open to interpretation. Now, I would say that Mars Canal is definitely the most divisive film within this anthology. I could see some people not liking it if you're not into like really weird films, but it mixes things up nicely, and it's a good one to check out. Only 6 minutes long, so not much of a time investment. Now the second story is called Mirror Hell, and it's directed by Akio Jisoji, who has a consistently artful career behind him. If you look at his filmography, not many of his films have been released in the West. I have checked out a handful of them on YouTube and various other streaming sites. A lot of this guy's films are very odd, artsy, and experimental. But some of them are very interesting, and this one's pretty good. So the plot goes like this. When a series of women are discovered with their faces burnt and skulls charred, a young detective investigates, discovering that a unique hand mirror is always found at the scene. So I personally found this one to be, although it's pretty good, probably the least purely entertaining segment of this anthology. Mostly because it lacks a particularly engrossing mystery and also has a rather anticlimactic resolution to it. However, it does have some value in terms of Japanese culture that's presented, and as well as tradition, as well as a few good conversations involving mirrors. There's also a few interesting shots involving mirrors as well, so this one's worth watching, although I think it's probably the least entertaining of the bunch. The third story is called Caterpillar, and is directed by our good friend Hisayasu Sato, who is a director most familiar with the exploitation subgenre of horror film. He gave us the very memorable horror film Naked Blood, which we covered back in 1995, as well as a few others that we've covered. I like this director despite the fact that his films are very weird. Now in this film, a war hero returns home with no limbs and only his eyesight remaining. His beautiful wife, tired of taking care of him, turns to torturing him for amusement. So as you might expect from this director, the violence is particularly disgusting in this one, and features a filthy sex scene, actually, which, although it's kind of filthy, I find it to be really oddly intoxicating and engrossing, because I've given the physical state of this man and the woman, definitely one of the most bizarre sex scenes I've ever seen, and the fact that it's so bizarre makes it an interesting watch, really. Definitely, it's not often where you think that a sex scene could add something to a horror film, but this one definitely does, it at the very least in terms of weirdness. But there is a noticeable aura of disturbance present on a dramatic level as well. So this film does have a certain dramatic basis when you look at how the relationship between these two characters is developed. The characters, I think, are fairly interesting, and the relationship certainly is, so I like this one, Caterpillar. Now, the fourth story is Crawling Bugs. A sexy actress is returning home from a successful night on stage until her limo driver decides that she should be coming home with him. Again, very weird. You heard me say that word multiple times. This anthology is weird. A weird, gruesome, and unsettling story that is proficiently executed all around. Acting is good. Directing, obviously, is good. The ending, in particular, is very nasty. So this anthology overall, you kind of have an artsy vibe to it, very nicely shot. You also have a very kind of grimy, nasty edge to it, in terms of the violence as well. Nice combination there. In the end, I think this anthology, Rampo Noir, is a solid feature that offers some original, weird, refreshing elements to the horror genre. So this is definitely one where if you're you're itching for something different, check this one out. It's worth watching. And Rampo Noir is widely available on DVD, so that's out there for you. Our next film tonight is also, as I promised, very unorthodox, especially for its country of origin, and that is Secret Room Number 7, a Thai horror film. Now, this extremely low-budget, obscure movie shows the strange events surrounding a mysterious room in an apartment complex. So this combines the local belief of Pipop, the flesh-eating spirit of northeastern Thailand, with a modern-day love story involving domestic violence. The main character is a woman who investigates the strange events within this apartment complex. So, based on this premise, you might expect a generic ghost film, but you would be completely wrong in that assumption. This movie really surprised me when I first saw it almost a decade ago. The only reason I watched it is because it was an Asian horror film. I wasn't expecting much, and this one is pretty cool. The budget is, as I like to say, lunch money size, which means it's minuscule. The acting is a bit hit or miss. The plot is meandering. It doesn't have a very linear plot that drives through the story, drives through. It meanders a bit within the complex and looks on the lives of the characters, which some people might consider a negative. And it has a little bit of an amateurish feel to it in terms of overall production values. But, the extremely moody lighting, the glacial pacing, the relentlessly ambient score, the effective sound design all create a very thick layer of atmosphere that proves to be this film's greatest strength. Despite the budget limitations, this thing's just soaking in atmosphere. The apartment complex itself is very grungy and unpleasant, actually kind of creepy, with the exception of the perverted dude who hangs around the lobby fish tank, who is hilarious, by the way. The placement of the camera in this film is also very weird. You have some first-person shots from inanimate objects from their perspectives. Some of the storyline is conveyed interview style, with characters talking directly to the camera as well. So there's a lot of... This film really mixes it up in terms of overall style. There are also some scantily clad Thai girls everywhere for the guys out there. A few flesh-eating zombies. Some gory deaths, and a very unusual villain. So all of these elements create a very unique experience. It's basically a student film, or at least it feels that way, with a very absorbing style that makes it very different from any other Thai horror film you will ever see. You know, so Secret Room number 7, I'm trying to think of how to sell this one to you. If you don't mind low production values and you want something very different and kind of artsy, this one might be up your alley. See, Rampo Noir had really excellent production values. Secret Room number 7 doesn't. But it's just so different from any other Thai horror film you're ever going to see. And this one kind of surprised me, as I've said, first time I watched it. There's something about this movie that I find interesting. Maybe it's the real atmospheric locations, but man, definitely very different. I recommend this one. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find. Used to be widely available, but not anymore. There is an unsubtitled Region 2 DVD floating around. I don't think the dialogue in this one is so important. You might want to check it out without subs. But this one, for some reason, is kind of special to me. I have it in my DVD collection, and something about it makes me want to watch it every once in a while. Hard to put your finger on it, you know what I mean? I think it's a pretty cool flick. Now, our next film is, surprise, surprise, another very creative one. While vacationing in Japan, I stopped by a DVD shop and blind bought it, and I'm glad I did. And that is Egg, a Japanese horror comedy film. Now, a woman of mixed lineage sees visions of an egg in her head, which eventually leads to violent encounters with a monstrous apparition. So the storyline in this one is interesting and rather unique when the details are revealed later on. And as can be expected from the premise, lots of weird stuff happens, and these incidents mostly straddle the line between spooky and humorous. There are a number of giggle-worthy sequences as well, and even a few laugh-out-loud moments I had in this. So the humor works. There's a nighttime inner battle, so to speak, that will please horror fans because this apparition is rather cheesy, actually. But it works given the wild shifts in tone from horror to comedy, and will certainly be appreciated by viewers who enjoy seeing rubber suit monsters, and you know who you are. Most surprisingly, the visuals in this are impressive. Lots of great camera work, lighting, and set designs to please the eye, which is all the more impressive if the budget is as low as I expect it to be. There's one scene, for example, at the very beginning that has a futuristic tone to it. There is a protagonist who's working at her computer and performing some kind of strange debugging of computer software. Very odd scene, but I found it interesting. Another positive is the lead actress, who I don't even really know her name because I haven't seen her in anything else, who is not only beautiful but also gives a solid performance and hits her comedic timing nicely with some subtle mannerisms and facial expressions. She really does carry the film from start to finish and helps to make the slower moments entertaining. So this was directed by Yukihiko Tsutsumi, who previously directed one of the Hanako-san movies that we covered back in the 90s. But I would say that one negative is that some of the visions are overly repetitive. But that shouldn't be a big problem for more patient viewers. But overall, this movie has a certain X factor that makes it fun to watch. Maybe I'd call it heart, but whatever it is, it works. And so if you're looking for a charmingly obscure oddity, here's another one for you. Now, unfortunately, Egg is also difficult to find. There's no international release, but there is an unsubtitled Region 2 DVD floating around. And of course, if you have other resources online, you could probably find it. Alright, so 3 very odd films to start off. So if you want something different, I'm giving it to you. Well, let's move back into something more common here with our next film from South Korea, and that is Cello. So after barely surviving a car crash that proved fatal for her best friend, Mi Ju abandons her career as a professional cellist and retreats into a quiet life teaching music. That is, until a sinister force arrives to stir up her haunted past. Our protagonist experiences strange occurrences in her household, which may be linked to the new gloomy housekeeper, an angry cello student that she's been dealing with, and or a haunting from a prior car accident. So as you can tell from this, even though this has kind of a very familiar vibe in terms of its style, for Asian horror. The script blends a stalker premise, a ghostly presence, and household conflicts all together. That helps to mix things up and keep the viewer engaged and even a bit off balance. So this movie is definitely confusing, though, for much of its runtime. Very fragmented and confusing by design, though, with the later scenes acting as an explanation for all that has come before it. I'm not sure if every element is explained entirely, but the final 30 minutes are entertaining and a step above the opening hour, which is a little bit on the slow side. This film, I think, has some repeat viewing capacity. You know what I mean? It has some rewatchability factor, because it might take you a few viewings to piece a lot of stuff together. Some of the death scenes are pretty effective, I thought, and some of the violence is actually inflicted upon small children, which is, of course, always welcome in my book. Finale uses a fairly common twist, but it uses it well. So Cello is a pretty good one. You know what I mean? If you want one that is maybe a little bit more familiar to you in terms of the style of contemporary Asian horror, this is one to go to. I recommend it. And Cello is widely available on DVD. Alright, so let's move on here. And we keep things interesting again with 2 entries in the Kazuo Umezu manga horror theater film series, which I'm a fan of. Very creative film series. So the first film here that we're going to cover in this film series for this video, because of course we covered a few before this one is called Diet, also known as Ambrosia, Japanese horror drama. Now, Tomoko is a schoolgirl who blames her bad luck in love on her weight. She has a distorted view of herself when looking in the mirror and keeps misreading the bathroom scales. Her mother keeps on feeding her up, while her best friend becomes interested in the boy who dumped her. Now, Tomoko then resolves to impress him by going on an extreme diet. All goes well at first, but will the mental stress get the best of her? Now, at 65 minutes in length, this is the longest installment of this Kazuo Umezu film series, but it's also the most ambitious character study, so the slightly longer runtime is justified. This is a very psychological movie that focuses a lot on developing the protagonist and seeing things from her perspective. The pacing is rather slow, taking its time to use quiet moments as well as some delusional events. It's all very interesting, and the bloody finale takes advantage of the filmmakers and the viewers' patience, I think. So be sure to watch the second ending, though, after the credits roll, which is a nice touch. So Diet, I think, of all the Kazuo Umezu films, probably has the most ambitious character study behind it, which also makes it pretty interesting to watch. So check it out. I would say that Diet is moderately available on DVD, mostly used, similar to a lot of the other installments in this franchise. Let's move to another one here, another interesting one, and that is called The Wish. So a lonely schoolboy discovers a block of wood carved into the shape of a human head. Seeking companionship, he and the puppet doll become best playmates. But soon things begin to change, and the situation goes from innocent to downright sinister. Now, this boy has no friends, so this puppet serves its purpose to keep him company for a while. But he later abandons it after meeting a cute girl. Well, who wouldn't? But needless to say, this puppet gets really pissed off. So similar to the other Umezu installments, the atmosphere here is quite effective despite a low budget. The film uses surreal-colored skylines to nice effect, which is similar to other installments. I like that. It gives it kind of an otherworldly, creepy feel. The doll in this film is one of the most intimidating in recent memory, for sure. Sporting wire dreadlocks and nails for teeth. Like, this thing's just over-the-top nasty looking. Chucky's got to he's got to move over, because this thing is nasty. Now, pacing is a bit on the slow side here, because it continually sets things up for the climax, which is very entertaining because it showcases kind of a violent one-on-one slugfest between the kid and the doll. The tone is never really super scary, though, and some of the moments are actually kind of cheesy, but it's still very entertaining, I think. Good stuff, and at only 15 minutes, it is easily consumable. So I recommend The Wish. And The Wish is, again, moderately available on DVD. Mostly used, but you may be able to find it new still. So we'll cover the last two films in this film series a little bit later in this video. But we got some other films to cover. Some other films that are very different, of course. A lot of variety here tonight. Now our next film is actually from Taiwan. We haven't covered many horror films from Taiwan. And that film is called The Heirloom. Now 20 years ago, a mass suicide occurred in the millionaire Yang household. To this day, the case remains unsolved. Only one heir secretly survived, and years later he inherits the family mansion and returns with his fiancée. Mysterious and deadly events begin to take place. The demented legacy of the Yang family curse is reborn, and history is soon poised to repeat itself. Now, you realize fairly early on that this mansion's curse kills unsuspecting people by hanging them with invisible ropes, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool change up in the typical haunted house premise. Now, this film does take itself very seriously, and it has very little in terms of light moments. And I think the overall quality benefits from this. The architecture and the feel of the old mansion itself is very cool. Old mansion environments, if they're showcased, are a big plus in movies for me. This is one of the more enjoyable aspects to this film, of course. The spiritual visions and family history are also handled fairly well. Actually, the very beginning of this film makes a statement regarding the practice of feeding the blood of aborted fetuses to nurture ghosts who can bring fortune to their masters and death to their masters' enemies, which is another interesting little element here. The horror scenes themselves are pretty commonplace, I think. Nothing really odd, but they are executed well enough. It does not use the Japanese onryo at all, though, so if you're sick of that thing, you can feel free to watch this without being confronted with it. Acting and direction are both solid in this. This is a good flick overall. I enjoyed The Heirloom. Good one from Taiwan. The Heirloom is widely available on DVD. Very nice creepy one there. And now we move on to Japan. A cyberpunk horror film. And we haven't covered too many of those yet, outside of like Tetsuo and Robber's Lover and a few others. And this one is called Meatball Machine. Parasites invade humans, turning them into cyborg-like killing machines called necroborgs, biomechanical monsters who can transform their own flesh into weaponry. The two main characters are a young man and woman, both of which suffer from bullying and physical violence perpetrated by others. This story is bare bones, I think, but it doesn't matter since the Japanese cyberpunk subgenre of film focuses more on outlandish, surrealistic imagery that can really take the viewer off guard. And this film has tons of blood-soaked body horror imagery to enjoy, if you're into that thing, and I am. There are some effective creature designs and gore, which is no surprise when one realizes that the gore effects were handled by Yoshihiro Nishimura, who would later work on films such as The Machine Girl and Tokyo Gore Police. So if you like the horror elements of those titles, that's another reason to check out Meatball Machine, which is a great title for a film, I must say. This does have a more serious edge to it, though. You know, with the title Meatball Machine, you might expect a lot of goofy comedy mixed in, but it doesn't. It's pretty serious for the most part. There's almost no humor at all, actually. Maybe some black humor, but not too much more. So just keep that in mind. Now, the DVD availability in Meatball Machine, which I definitely recommend if you're into something different, is that it's widely available, which is nice. Now, the DVD includes 2 short films as special features. The original Meatball Machine, 13 minutes long, which is a very low-budget project that inspired the theatrical film here, and is pretty watchable. And then there's Reject of Death, which is 10 minutes long and is pretty entertaining in its own right, with some better gore and violence than the original Meatball Machine. That's another reason to purchase this DVD. I guess you get some short films there to mix it up, and that are pretty interesting, as well as the feature film. Again, a very odd collection of films tonight, man. A huge variety. Meatball Machine just adds to the variety of this industry during this exceptional year. Next film here is called Haze from Japan. A man wakes up within a maze of extremely dangerous crawl spaces, bleeding from his abdomen from an injury that he sustained while he was unconscious. So he can barely move, and he has no recollection of why or how he came to be in this place. So crawling forward, he eventually meets a woman, and they try to piece together their past lives and attempt to escape. Now, our good friend Shinya Tsukamoto directs and stars in this one, so there's a very good chance that it's worth watching, and it certainly is. This is one of the most claustrophobic movies you will ever see. A lot of the time, our protagonist is forced to inch his way through these tight areas. I mean, like, there's so little room to move in this film for our protagonist that you really feel like, you almost feel like pausing the movie and taking a walk outside. That's how claustrophobic this is. So if you like that type of film, this is definitely for you. A lot of, there's a constant aura of suspense, and there's an uncomfortable, violent situation that's followed by another and another. So it's not just this guy going through these spaces. He's going through these spaces with almost like booby traps, more or less, or things that are supposed to cause pain as you're moving through them. So it's definitely a very uncomfortable film to watch, and I think that's a good thing. There is some ambiguity, though, in terms of the storyline and the mystery, but the meaning of the film is understandable with a bit of contemplation, I think. You know, it's one of those films where the end kind of changes your perception of things, but it's good. Definitely more thought-provoking than you might expect, given the simplistic premise. Now, one criticism I would make is that the lighting at times is very dark, perhaps a little bit too dark at times for my liking, but, you know, it's kind of a minor gripe. At only 50 minutes, this one flies right by. I wish there were more horror films released that were around like the 60, 50, 70-minute mark. There's a few that we're covering here. The Kazuo Umezu series, this one, Haze. You know, it really helps the pacing, and you can keep the film simple and still develop stuff. It's pretty good. So Haze I recommend. Now, Haze is difficult to find, but if you can find the Region 2 Japanese DVD, you might want to pick it up, because this one can be viewed without subtitles. There's not a lot of dialogue in it. All of the themes and the content is expressed visually. So you can watch this one without subtitles, I really think. And we keep mixing things up here. Keep mixing it up with the final two films in the Kazuo Umezu manga horror film series. Now, these two, I would say, are probably my favorites. Although, I would say, really, you know, we covered the lesser two in an earlier video, Snake Girl and Deathmake, which I think are still creative and entertaining to watch, by the way. And then, you know, the top four here are really kind of interchangeable in terms of their overall quality. And we have Diet, we got The Wish, and now we have the next one here called House of Bugs, a horror drama. And again, these are all from Japan, these Kazuo Umezu films. In this story about an unfaithful couple, the husband believes his cheating wife may no longer be human. Unsure of what to do next, he asks his lover to look in on his wife. Someone, it would seem, has lost their mind. So the situation here is very intriguing, because the husband and the wife remember important events in completely different ways. So this disconnect in perception causes significant friction between them, and the story gets more and more interesting as it progresses. Now this, you know, this theme of perception, you know, kind of an overall psychological, philosophical vibe might remind you of a Japanese director, and that director is Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Well, it's not a coincidence, because he actually directed this film. Now, the lighting and sound, as expected from this director, are very nicely done, despite the limited budget. And even the CGI is effectively implemented, I think. Very briefly, I might add. This is a nice little psychological gem with some imaginative sequences and some thought-provoking mystery elements to it. Again, 15-minute runtime, it makes it an easy sit, which is always an advantage for this particular film series. So I would recommend House of Bugs. It's, man, it's hard to call it one of my favorites, but it really is one of my favorites of this particular film series out of the 6. Alright. And the DVD availability is basically the same as the other ones. Moderately available, mostly used. And now the last film in this film series we're covering, man, you know, it's so hard to pick a favorite, but this one's pretty close. And when I tell you the premise, it's easy to see why. And this film is called Present. Again, Kazuo Umezu from Japan. College students are having a sexy, festive time at a desolate hotel during the Christmas season. That is, until Santa Claus shows up. He's made a list and he's checking it twice. If you've been naughty, you're gonna die. That's one of the taglines for the movie. Real creative. Santa gets royally pissed off and viciously slays some of the kids in this movie, which is what you want to see in a film such as this, right? So this is a basic slasher at its core that is accentuated with some bells and whistles that I find particularly entertaining. The set designs and the lighting are really good in this, using shades of deep red and deep green, which create a strong but creepy holiday mood to it. The black humor is a nice touch too, especially the very brief cameo by some reindeer. The body count in this is very low, which is a disadvantage, I think, but there is still some blood and dismemberment on display for you to enjoy. And again, 15 minutes, the entry flies right by. But it still manages to toss in a good psychological twist involving perception again. So the Kazuo Umezu film series, you know, low budget, but they have some interesting stuff in there, some interesting themes. These are good flicks. Not a deep film necessarily, but there are some interesting themes beneath the surface of Present. It's one of those movies that I skip during October when I watch a lot of horror movies, and instead I watch this one during December because, you know, it's got the holiday vibe to it. Sometimes the holiday season you want to watch a horror-themed holiday film. Much like Box from Three Extremes, which isn't necessarily holiday-themed, but Box is just set in the dead cold of winter. I like watching that one during the winter time too, so Asian horror can contribute to your winter festivals. So Kazuo Umezu, Present, again. It is moderately available, mostly used. And I promised in a previous video that I would give some advice on the DVD purchases on these films. So here we go. Alright, so Volume 1 of this series includes House of Bugs and Diet. Volume 2 has Snake Girl and The Wish. And Volume 3 has The Present and Deathmake. So if you're talking about overall, you know, I said before that Deathmake and Snake Girl are the weakest or most flawed entries. So that would mean that Volume 1 probably is the best in terms of overall quality, because you get House of Bugs and Diet. But it depends on what you feel like. Because if you feel like a killer doll movie, you might want to get the volume with The Wish in it. If you feel like a killer Santa Claus movie, which when are you never in the mood for that, unless it's the summertime, you know, you could get the Present and Deathmake combo. So, you know, hopefully I've given you enough information to choose which volume to choose first, to have a look at. And then if you enjoy it, move on to the rest. And we come to our last film of the evening here. Moving along pretty well here. So many interesting films that we're covering tonight. And this one is, again, a little bit more conventional in terms of contemporary Japanese horror, but it has its own bells and whistles. And that is The Booth. This film opens with the mysterious death of a DJ in a recording booth. Years later, it fast forwards, and a young DJ uses the same booth and experiences strange phone calls and noises. Despite taking place almost exclusively within the radio station, this film is quite different. The most obvious positive of this movie is that it eludes many genre cliches while at the same time producing some unexpected twists. It sets itself up as kind of a mystery, with many sound clues and flashbacks that provide clues to the viewer to figure things out. It also has some uncomfortable moments that are relatable, because this character, our protagonist, becomes distracted by these odd events while he's broadcasting his radio show live, which leads to some real blunders on his part, and you can kind of relate to that. You feel embarrassed for him, even though he seems like kind of a jerk. There's also some animosity between him and his technical staff, which is also interesting and creates a significant feel of paranoia and dramatic tension. This film has a lot of paranoia to it, and I didn't really, it's not that I didn't notice it the first time I saw it, but I rewatched it recently and I was like, man, there was a lot of paranoia in this movie as well. So, you know, you have kind of a possible ghostly vibe, or is this kind of in his head where he's just going nuts? It executes it well. There's a lot more going on here than you might expect. There are a few creepy moments too, especially near the end. There's one that's pretty creepy. With a minimal budget, limited actors, only one set location for the most part, this one does more with less. The Booth is a good movie, and I definitely recommend it. Again, on its surface, you know, some of the critics of Asian horror might see this one like a DVD on a shelf somewhere and read the back and be like, oh, it's another generic Asian ghost film with the Onryo ghost. But no, it isn't. There's a lot more nuance here. So The Booth is widely available on DVD. That's nice. So that's it for part 4 of this journey through Asian horror films released in 2005. Again, I gotta point out the huge variety of horror films that were released during this year. And be sure to join me for part 5, when I will take a look at the most entertaining films from this particular year, in my opinion. And as always, we'll see you next time.